Hey guys, it's Mark with Beast Music Shop here at the NAMM 2023 show, and we are here with Marcus at the Mellotron booth. How are you doing today, Marcus?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm super swell, especially sitting next to these awesome machines. Tell me a little bit about this guy. I don't believe I've seen this one before.
Oh yeah, this is the M4000D, the full-size version. So this has 100 Mellotron sounds and Chamberlain sounds built into it right from the start. And what's pretty unique about it is that it's got a poly aftertouch keyboard actually. So the aftertouch means, of course, that you have pressure sensitivity, but also here it's individual for each key, so you can emphasize different part of a chord you're playing, for example. So the other thing is that you can blend between A and B here, A being the classic 3 violins that we just heard, and then the Chamberlain cello, for instance. So we can blend like this seamlessly over to the cello and maybe find a good in-between somewhere here, for example. Then of course it's easy to select all these different sounds that are built in. For example, the trombone sound. This is a trombone sound that Beatles uses on Bungalow Bill, for instance. What also is in this instrument, in this occasion, is that it has some of the rhythm loops that the big instruments had in the past. But what's also interesting is that since we talked about Beatles and Bungalow Bill, this is the start of Bungalow Bill. So that's what they did back in those days. They just used an effect, basically, that was built into the instrument. Then on that expansion card, we also have the rhythm tracks that they had, rhythms and fills. So this was the original concept of the Mellotron, being more like a home entertainment organ and like one-man band kind of thing. It didn't quite work out that way, and of course then Beatles and the Stones and Led Zeppelin and everybody basically used it in the 70s. But then it was more like what was more like this kind of format, a smaller instrument, as opposed to the double manual, huge instrument that looks more like a home organ, so to say. So, of course, you have many more settings in the config menu. You can set level and attack for different keys, and you have got a bunch of adjustment possibilities. But when we developed this, we wanted to emphasize on easy access to all of these sounds, so you can easily write songs and come up with ideas just by scrolling through completely different sounds that you might want to orchestrate your song with strings, and then you might find that maybe a choir is a better fit, and then you can just check that out while you're going, so to say. And we have expansion cards for the M4000D series, and the M4000D series is this big guy, the Mini that we're going to show later, and the Rack, which is a rack version of this basically. So we just came out with card 6 that I will demo on the Mini in a moment. But we have the expansion card 2, 3, 4, and 5 that has a bunch of different more sounds available for the instrument, basically. So then we also have the Micro here, which is not in the M4000D series. It's a smaller instrument with only the 100 built-in sounds, but still it's a kind of a neat composition tool that you might use for like just songwriting and stuff like that. It has a similar user interface, smaller keyboard, only mono aftertouch on this keyboard. So each key is not individual for the aftertouch, but of course it's polyphonic, obviously. So same principle here with the AB mix and the 100 sounds on the 2 different channels, and the pitch, of course, and volume and tone as usual. Right.
Super cool.
Any questions? Any more questions? No?
Let's move over to that one.
Yeah, sure.
That was the big one, and the Micro, and now we have something in between over here, right?
Exactly. This is the Mini, and it has the same expansion possibilities as the big one over there, but it just doesn't have the poly aftertouch keypad. So that's, and not XLR balanced outs, but that's the only real difference. But what I can show here on this one is the new expansion card that just came out a day or so ago here, just for now. So the stock instruments have pre-built-in sounds, 100 of them, but they're not looped. So after 9 seconds, it will run out, which was how we made it when it came out 13 years ago. Now we've had the time to properly loop the sounds with a very long looping time, and we brought that out on card 5 for the Mellotron sounds, but now also on card 6 for the Chamberlin sounds. So we have here, for example, the cello on the Chamberlin, but now with a loop. So it will loop and loop and loop and loop. But of course it has the attack with the swell. And this keyboard, you might hear some volume changes. I'm not a keyboardist, but this is a mono aftertouch keyboard, so it's pressure sensitive. So the other sounds that are new on this card are like some previously unreleased sounds from the Chamberlin library. For example, a recorder, which hasn't been available before. There's even a tremolo viola, a new cello, another new cello, and another new cello, which and another new cello. So it's these are kind of useful sounds because there's only been one Chamberlin cello available so far. And then we actually we found a new female solo voice. It's still the same singer, but she has a slightly different intonation when she did these sounds.
And so you're saying that these are recordings that you found from the originals?
Archive, yes. We have the whole original archive, so we just hadn't had the chance to go through all of it, and we're not at the bottom of it yet either. But this is from the Chamberlin archive right now. Then we're going to go back to the Mellotron archive and dig a little bit more in that. But the other interesting thing with this card is that Chamberlin put out obviously tape replay keyboard instruments, but they also put out Rhythmate, which are loop machines that have actual infinite loops in them with drum patterns. So, if, for example, this sound, so these have been very, very popular for making beats and stuff, but of course there's only about maybe 50 around that are still working, so that's why we put this out, because it's also in the line of tape sample playback instruments. This is the older version of these instruments that had 3-track tapes, but he then also made a 16-track version of it that looks slightly different and has some other rhythms. One of them is supposedly a Hawaiian war chant. We haven't quite been able to identify it, but he had an interesting, might actually be this. Sounds a little bit warlike to me, but he liked these marches, so, but you can always like tune them down and use them for soundtracks and stuff like that. So
yeah, that you can take these recordings from, I mean, what year was this? Do you know exactly?
These recordings are made in the mid-60s, sorry. The first ones I showed, those are from the mid-50s, and the other ones are from the mid-60s. So, because the 3-track version came out in the late 50s, early 60s, and the 16-track version came out in the late 60s. So, but this is another thing that you can do with our instrument. You can have like, a ramp going from one.
So you're kind of almost changing what would be the tape speed there,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Changing the tape speed. And speaking of which, we can go over to this guy, where I can actually demonstrate how it was working.
Is there technically a speaker somewhere? Or?
Yes.
Oh, we're coming through this. So is that...
Somebody tune up this pitch like crazy here, so...
Are you getting that at all?
Yeah, it should be. It goes to the mixer.
Oh, it's going... Oh.
It should be. So...
It's almost like you know what you're doing.
Yeah. I try to. So... yes, so this is the 70s version of the old home organ instrument. And for this one, of course, they recorded bassoon, and I mean, the first Mellotron didn't have even a cello. So viola, cello, string sections, bassoon, oboe, tons of sounds that they had to record for this instrument, because they realized pro musicians are actually that find these instruments useful, and maybe not your average home user that doesn't have a service tech available, so to say. So this instrument plays back tape strips. It's not a loop, because otherwise you would lose the attack. If you'd have a loop, it wouldn't know where the attack is, so to say. So if you stop in the middle of the note, it will just play from the middle of the note, which would sound, in a vibraphone, it would sound bizarre.
How long are the tapes?
3.5 seconds.
3.5.
That's how much space there is in the tape frame. Most of the masters were 9 seconds long, so that's how long the sounds are in the digital ones. But this is like how much tape actually would fit into a tape frame.
So I've always been curious, what happens when you hold it more than 3.5 seconds?
It's the drive mechanism slips, so it just starts slipping. So it's nothing happens, it just stops. You can hear that on Wonderwall by Oasis. It's just the sound goes like, and it stops. Yeah. Otherwise, these instruments wouldn't have been popular if you'd break it when you go to the end of the sound. So this is, on these ones, they were made to be taken apart. So here you can see the flywheel, and actually here I have actually a feature that does the same thing. It slows down the speed of the capstan here, and the flywheel, of course. So I incorporated this in the motor control boards that I developed for these instruments, and it was a very useful feature, so that's why I had it also on the digital one. So then here you can actually see what's going on, because it's made to be opened up, because this is 3-track tape. So here you have strings, flute, and choir. And that, of course, will only take you so far. So if you want, like, cello...
We're just taking it right down to the guts.
Exactly. So if you want cello, for instance, you can just remove the tape frame like this.
Wow.
And here you see the heads, one for each key. And here you see how you move the heads. They're mono heads. So you move the playback gap between the 3 tracks. And then you take out these screws.
So you're pulling out a whole nother strip here, huh?
Yeah, I'm pulling out the whole tape frame, yes. There you go, boom.
There it is.
So, and then if you have another tape frame, you can take that and put that into the instrument, and you might want like cello, voice choir, and vibraphone on it, or whatever.
Do you know how many of these, like different varieties, originally were out there?
Well, they were. There's a huge library, and you could already, also back in the day, but also with us since 1990, you can have your own custom set made. You can combine any sound within the library. So there were many different combinations. But of course, most of the tape racks out there were the stock ones that came with the instruments, which is flute, strings, and choir, or flute, strings, and cello. Those are by far the most common ones. So, but there were people that had sound effects on them, or yeah, just tons of different stuff. For instance, Tangerine Dream, they recorded their own sounds, sent it to the Mellotron company, and then had it put on custom tape frames for them that had their own recorded sounds with vocal effects and synth effects and other sound effects, and you know, it was the only sample playback sampler available in the 70s that had a reasonable fidelity. There's also the Orchestron and Optigon, of course. They were optical devices that had samples in them, but those were much lower fidelity, and it was a nightmare to put on special sounds there. You have to loop them because they were on discs. So we have that whole archive also on Card 4 available. So that's kind of interesting. But for the pro musician back in the 70s, this was the only way to go, basically.
And now it's a little bit easier to switch sounds nowadays. What'd you say?
Yes, and a little bit less space consuming. People often ask me, so I'm people that might have a little bigger budget, they're saying like, well, so I'm wondering if I should buy an analog or a digital Mellotron. And I'm like, well, you're actually comparing apples and pears in a way, because you're comparing an analog Mellotron with half a room full of tape frames that will cost you a fortune if you compare it with a digital one, because the digital has actually 100 sounds built into it. It's not like comparing a digital and an analog Hammond, because you get the same sounds basically, you know, basically. I mean, of course the analog one would sound a lot better, but here you have a huge library of sound just with the instrument, and then you can of course expand it. So what will take up half a studio, you can just fit into the instrument. Yeah. So, of course, I like the old instruments, but if you want a powerful songwriting tool for a musician, you want to switch between maybe different vibraphones and a piano sound and maybe guitar sound and whatnot. That's virtually impossible here unless you have a huge budget and a lot of time. Because if you on a whim want to try out some sounds and you need to order them from us to put on tapes, I don't think it's going to put a bit of a damper on your creativity, I assume. Yeah. So on the digital ones, you just dial and you have a completely new sound at your fingertips, so to say.
It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.